The cream-colored envelope sat untouched on the kitchen counter for 3 days, shifting slightly whenever the heater clicked on, as if even the air in the apartment wanted her to deal with it. Lena Carter didn't need to open it to know what it was. The gold-embossed letters on the front gave it away: Ridgewood High School 10-year reunion. She had heard about it through mutual friends weeks ago, seen tagged posts and nostalgic countdowns online. She knew he would be there. Daniel Mercer. Her ex-husband. The man who had once sworn forever in front of their friends under twinkling fairy lights, promising loyalty and partnership, then quietly dismantled her reputation when their marriage cracked under pressure. He had walked away polished and admired, shaking hands and accepting sympathy, while she had been whispered about like a scandal no one fully understood but everyone felt entitled to discuss. Back then, Daniel had been charming, charismatic, the golden boy of their town. Teachers adored him. Parents trusted him. After the divorce, he subtly painted her as unstable, difficult, ungrateful. Just enough suggestion to let assumptions grow on their own. It was easier for people to believe him than to question the version of events they'd already decided on. She hadn't returned to Ridgewood since. Lena picked up the envelope and finally opened it. A formal card slipped out. Elegant. Predictable. Almost rehearsed in its cheerfulness. She almost laughed. 2 years ago, she would have declined without a thought. But 2 years ago, she had still been rebuilding herself, emotionally, financially, socially, stitching confidence back together in private. Now she was someone entirely different. Her life in New York had reshaped her. Therapy sessions that left her raw but stronger. Hard work. Long nights building her event design firm from nothing but grit and vision. She had clawed her way back into confidence, piece by fragile piece. And she wasn't alone anymore. Her gaze drifted toward the hallway where a navy suit hung pressed and ready. A small, knowing smile curved her lips. Maybe it was time to go home. The reunion venue glittered with soft chandelier light and champagne laughter, the kind of polished elegance meant to make nostalgia feel luxurious. Round tables draped in ivory linen filled the ballroom, and a slideshow of old high school photos flickered across a large screen near the stage. Lena entered alone. For a brief second, the noise seemed to dim, like the room had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. She wore a deep emerald dress, elegant but understated, the fabric catching the light without demanding it. No flashy diamonds. No attempt to impress anyone. Just quiet confidence stitched into every line of her posture. Heads turned almost immediately. Whispers followed in soft, curious waves. Is that Lena? She looks different. Didn't she move away after the divorce? She felt every glance like a shift in temperature against her skin, but she kept her spine straight and her expression calm. Years ago, this kind of attention would have shattered her, sent her searching for the nearest exit. Tonight, she refused to shrink. Then she saw him. Daniel stood near the bar, surrounded by old classmates who still seemed to orbit him naturally. He looked exactly the same, tailored suit, smug half-smile, effortless confidence that had once drawn her in. When his eyes landed on her, surprise flickered briefly before it sharpened into something calculating. He excused himself and approached her slowly, like a predator certain of the outcome. "Lena," he said smoothly. "I wasn't sure you'd have the courage to show up." The word courage dripped with mockery. She smiled politely. "I almost didn't." His gaze traveled over her. Still alone. There it was. The first jab. A few nearby classmates pretended not to listen but leaned closer, glasses hovering mid-air. Daniel lowered his voice just enough to seem casual. "I heard things didn't work out for you in the city. Must have been hard starting over without support." A subtle reminder. He had once been the provider. Lena held her composure. "I've managed." He chuckled lightly. "Of course you have." Then he raised his glass. "To growth, right?" It sounded harmless. But it wasn't. It was the beginning of a performance. And Lena suddenly understood. Daniel hadn't come here to reconnect. He had come to remind everyone that he won. Or at least, that's what he believed. An hour later, just as the music softened and dessert plates were cleared, the reunion committee invited Daniel to the stage. Of course they did. He had been student body president, star athlete, voted most likely to succeed. In this town, he was still the blueprint of achievement, the golden story parents told their children about hard work and charm. The town had never really stopped adoring him. Daniel stood smoothly, buttoned his jacket, and made his way to the microphone as if he had rehearsed this moment. He adjusted it with practiced ease, flashing that familiar smile that once made teachers forgive late assignments and investors sign contracts. "I just want to say how great it is to see everyone," he began warmly. Laughter and applause followed on cue. "Life's been good. Business is thriving." He paused, letting the praise settle, and then his eyes found Lena across the room. "And sometimes," he continued casually, "life teaches you lessons the hard way. Like learning who really stands by you when things get tough." A few confused looks spread through the room, subtle but noticeable. He sighed theatrically, shaking his head as though reflecting on deep wisdom. Divorce changes you. You think you know someone, then suddenly there's someone else entirely. The air shifted. Conversation stilled. He didn't say her name, but he didn't have to. Everyone knew their history. Leaning casually against the podium, he added, "I've always believed in loyalty. In commitment. In building something stable." Now people were looking at Lena openly, no longer pretending discretion. Her throat tightened, heat creeping up her neck, but she didn't move. She refused to give him the satisfaction of flinching. Daniel smiled sympathetically, as if he were the wounded one. "Anyway, I wish everyone here happiness. Especially those still searching for it." The implication was crystal clear. The crowd clapped, but it sounded uneven. Forced. Lena felt the familiar burn of humiliation rising in her chest, the same burn she had felt in courtrooms and quiet town gossip when whispers followed her through grocery aisles. Daniel stepped down from the stage to applause, soaking it in. And then he walked straight toward her again. "You look uncomfortable," he murmured softly. "Maybe small towns just weren't your thing." It wasn't just cruelty. It was calculated dominance. And for a split second, Lena wondered if she had made a mistake coming. Then the entrance doors opened. The doors didn't just open. They commanded attention. A tall figure stepped inside, and the subtle hush that followed moved through the ballroom like a slow ripple across water. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Even the clink of glasses seemed to quiet on its own. Tailored charcoal suit. Impeccable posture. Effortless authority that didn't beg to be noticed. It simply existed. Ethan Cole. Lena's husband. Though most of the room didn't recognize him immediately, a few did, and their expressions shifted from mild curiosity to unmistakable shock. Phones subtly lowered. Whispers sharpened. Because Ethan Cole wasn't just anyone. He was the CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech investment firms in Manhattan. His name had appeared in business magazines, financial interviews, and industry headlines that talked about innovation and billion-dollar acquisitions. He wasn't small-town successful. He was national news successful. Daniel noticed the silence first. He turned slowly. And for the first time that evening, his confidence faltered. Ethan's eyes found Lena instantly, as if the crowded room didn't exist at all. He crossed the ballroom without hesitation, without scanning faces or acknowledging the stares. When he reached her, the authority in his posture softened, but only for her. "I'm sorry I'm late," he said quietly, his voice steady and warm. "Board meeting ran over." His hand slipped naturally around her waist, familiar and protective without being possessive. The intimacy was undeniable. The room held its breath. Daniel forced a short laugh. "And you are?" Ethan turned to him slowly, composed. "Ethan Cole," he replied calmly. Then he extended his hand. "Lena's husband." The word landed like thunder cracking across glass. A visible shift swept through the crowd. Someone near the bar whispered, "Ethan Cole? The Ethan Cole." Daniel's smile stiffened at the edges. He shook Ethan's hand, but the power dynamic had already flipped, subtle yet irreversible. "I didn't realize Lena remarried," Daniel said carefully, measuring his tone. Ethan's grip tightened just slightly before releasing. "We prefer privacy." Lena felt warmth flood her chest, not because Ethan was wealthy, not because of the murmurs echoing around them, but because he wasn't here to perform. He was here for her. And suddenly, Daniel's stage didn't feel so stable anymore. Word spread through the ballroom like wildfire carried on perfume and champagne breath. Phones discreetly appeared beneath tables. Screens glowed softly. Searches were made under the illusion of casual scrolling. Net worth estimates were whispered. Headlines were remembered. Recognition traveled faster than gossip ever had. And suddenly, Daniel's earlier speech began to sound different in retrospect. Smaller, almost desperate. What had felt commanding minutes ago now felt like overcompensation. The reunion organizer hurried over, practically tripping over her own heels in sudden enthusiasm. "Mr. Cole, we had no idea you'd be attending. This is such an honor." Her smile stretched wider than it had all evening. Daniel stood slightly aside now, no longer the gravitational center of the room. The shift was subtle but undeniable. Ethan offered a polite nod. "I'm just here to support my wife." Wife. The word was calm, but intentional. Solid. Daniel cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the narrative. "So what exactly do you do, Ethan?" The question was light, but the challenge underneath it was not. Ethan's expression didn't change. "I build companies. Invest in innovation. Try to create opportunities." Lena almost smiled. That was the modest version, the stripped-down summary of boardrooms, acquisitions, and headlines that shaped markets. Daniel forced a chuckle. Must be nice having that kind of safety net. The insult slid in quietly, suggesting Lena had married up for comfort, for protection, for financial cushioning. Before Lena could respond, Ethan did. "She doesn't need one." The room went still again, the silence thicker this time. Lena built her firm from scratch. Ethan continued calmly, his tone steady, factual. "In fact, we recently partnered on a hospitality expansion project. Her design secured the contract." A few audible gasps slipped through the crowd. Daniel blinked. "You work together." "She's the visionary," Ethan said without hesitation. "I'm lucky to keep up." There was no arrogance. No attempt to dominate the space. Just respect. Open and unwavering. The difference was stark. One man had tried to shrink her publicly. The other elevated her without effort. Daniel glanced around and realized something quietly terrifying. The audience had shifted allegiance. And Lena was no longer the woman he left behind. She was the woman who had outgrown him. Later that evening, when the music grew louder and the crowd thinned toward the dance floor, Daniel cornered Lena near the terrace doors. Cool night air slipped in through the cracked glass, brushing against the tension between them. The city lights beyond the balcony flickered faintly, distant and indifferent. "You planned this," he accused quietly, his voice tight enough that only she could hear. She blinked at him, genuinely confused by the certainty in his tone. "Planned what?" "Showing up with him," Daniel snapped under his breath. "Making me look like a fool in front of everyone." Lena exhaled slowly, steadying herself. The old version of her would have rushed to defend, to soothe, to fix the discomfort in his voice. "You did that yourself," she replied evenly. His jaw tightened, a muscle ticking visibly near his temple. "You always needed someone stronger to hide behind." The words were meant to sting, to drag her backward into a role she used to play, smaller, apologetic, uncertain. But she didn't flinch this time. "I don't hide anymore, Daniel." Her voice wasn't loud, but it didn't waver. For a brief moment, the old dynamic tried to resurface, the subtle intimidation, the emotional pressure, the unspoken expectation that she would fold first. It had worked for years. But it didn't work now. "I loved you once," she said softly, and that truth hung heavier than anger ever could. "But loving you meant shrinking myself. It meant making myself quieter so you could feel louder. I won't do that again." Daniel looked unsettled, as if the script he'd prepared no longer applied. "You think he's better than me?" he demanded, though the edge in his voice betrayed uncertainty. "No," she replied calmly. "He's better for me." There was a difference, One rooted in compatibility, in respect, in growth rather than competition. And in that quiet space between them, Daniel finally understood something he hadn't anticipated. He wasn't competing with Ethan. He was competing with the version of Lena he had underestimated, dismissed, and tried to control. And he had already lost. As the night wound down and the music shifted into softer, nostalgic tracks, Ethan reached for Lena's hand. His fingers intertwined with hers naturally, grounding her in a way that felt steady rather than possessive. "Ready?" he asked gently, searching her face instead of assuming the answer. She nodded, a quiet certainty settling into her expression. They walked toward the exit together. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Just steady. The kind of steady that doesn't need spectacle to be powerful. Conversations paused as they passed through the ballroom. Laughter dimmed into murmurs. A few people offered polite smiles. Others watched with open curiosity. But the energy had shifted entirely from earlier in the evening. Daniel stood near the bar, a half-finished drink in his hand, watching them cross the room. This time, no one stood beside him. No circle of admirers. No applause echoing in approval. No spotlight framing him as the golden success story. Outside, the night air felt cooler, cleaner. A sleek black car waited at the curb, headlights glowing softly against the pavement. The driver stepped out to open the door, but Ethan paused first. Before getting in, he turned to her. "You okay?" It wasn't performative concern. It was real. Lena looked back at the building one last time, at the windows glowing with artificial warmth, at the place that once felt suffocating with judgment and memory. "I am now," she said honestly. For years, that town had held power over her story, her reputation, her confidence. Tonight, she walked away untouched. Not because she had married wealth, but because she had rebuilt her worth. The car door closed with a quiet finality. And for the first time since her divorce, Lena felt something solid settle in her chest. Peace. By morning, social media buzzed with the kind of energy only small towns and big names can create together. Notifications stacked up. Group chats revived. Old classmates who hadn't spoken in years suddenly had opinions again. Photos from the reunion circulated, but not the ones Daniel had imagined when he stood confidently at that podium. It wasn't his speech that people shared. Not the carefully crafted lines about loyalty or success. It was the image of Lena standing confidently beside Ethan, her posture calm, her expression unshaken. It was the quiet way he looked at her, not like a trophy, but like a partner. That was the photo that spread. By afternoon, short online articles began linking Ethan Cole to the small-town reunion he had unexpectedly attended. Headlines hinted at curiosity. Comment sections speculated about why a Manhattan billionaire would appear at a modest high school event. But those who were there knew the truth. Former classmates messaged Lena privately, their words very different from the whispers years ago. "I had no idea what he put you through. You handled that with so much grace. You look genuinely happy." The tone had changed. The assumptions had softened. Daniel, meanwhile, posted nothing. No recap. No photos. No clever captions. Because the narrative had shifted. Not dramatically. Quietly. And that was far more powerful. Weeks later, Lena received an email from the reunion committee. They were organizing an alumni entrepreneurship panel and wanted to know if she would consider speaking about building a business from the ground up. She stared at the message for a long moment before smiling. Years ago, she had been the cautionary tale, the woman people pitied in hushed voices. Now she was the comeback story. And the most satisfying part? She didn't need revenge. She didn't need public validation or apologies broadcasted online. She simply needed to show up as who she had become. Daniel had tried to humiliate his ex-wife. Instead, he witnessed her evolution. And some lessons. They're only learned when the spotlight turns.